Hey guys, welcome back to Car Culture TV, or as we like to call it, CCTV. I'm Audit.
And I'm Arian. And for all of us who aren't millionaires, the cars near and dear to our hearts are consumer cars. So today, let's take a step back from the $1 million supercars that we sometimes discuss and focus just on the daily drivers for the general population.
We're talking about your Toyota Corollas, your Hondas, your Nissans, the basic things that you drive day to day.
The cars most of us have. So, with that being said, all of our segments today are going to be catered towards consumer cars. We're going to start off by discussing the latest news in the car culture world in Speed Trap. Then we're going to move on to a return segment, Car Roast, where we'll be discussing yet another atrocious car. And then we'll be ending with a new segment we like to call the Debate Straight, where we'll be debating one of the most common arguments had in the car culture world. Now let's get into Speed Trap. So we've talked about Nissan quite a bit, from roasting the Nissan Juke to discussing the Ital-designed Nissan GTR. And well, every time we talk about Nissan, we always say, well, they need to change something soon because their car lineup is getting really outdated. Well, I'm so happy to say it finally happened because earlier this week, Nissan released a promotional video detailing their future plans. Let's roll the clip. So, as you guys may have seen in that video, Nissan is not only releasing a handful of new cars, but they're finally updating the cars that everyone has wanted them to update for several years, such as the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Frontier, and what I'm most excited for, the brand new Nissan Z.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it. Honestly, a lot of Nissan's designs, and kind of like we talked about last week, even up to the GTR as their, front page type of car, have been asking and begging for an update in terms of design. They've kept up a little bit in terms of power and tech, as anyone does, updating their infotainment and stuff like that. But the designs of the cars have honestly remained stagnant. And that V motion theme that they had brought in, especially with their front grills, has kind of gotten old, and it hasn't really been timeless. So now for them to release this commercial and to show us this wonderful lineup, I'm really looking forward to, as you said it, especially the Z.
Yeah, their lineup of cars is looking much better. They no longer have a static design that all their cars share. All their cars in that video looked pretty distinctly different. And they did some other changes in terms of their logo change. So the new Nissan logo is different. It's not that traditional Nissan logo we've been seeing for years. And they've also changed their motto.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see. So, as you know, Nissan for a long time, almost as like a meme at this point, has been innovation that excites. And we like to put that label on anything. You drive the most boring Nissan you can find, and you go, innovation that excites, just for fun, just ironically, right? But now they're calling themselves innovative and futuristic and passionate. And that's going to be really interesting because it really does show a huge paradigm shift. As much as we like to pass over mottos, a lot of car companies use them as driving philosophy, no pun intended. They use them as a means to shape what kind of cars they want to put out for the public, right? And for Nissan to finally change that shows that they're moving past that Carlos Ghosn era and moving into a time that's a lot more genuine, different, and finally branching away from their old philosophy. So I'm very excited to see that.
So yeah, even though this was just a name reveal of all the cars that are being updated and a loose reveal of what they might look like, because of the general direction that their new slogan is saying and what these cars really look like, I really think that they're also going to start changing their engine stuff. They're going to really be improving interior quality. They're finally going to drop that CVT transmission because Carlos Ghosn is gone and they no longer have to make cheaper cars because they have to compete with the likes of Hyundai and Kia, and even they all do automatic transmissions at this point. So I'm really glad to see them transforming into this new era, and it's really, really going to be interesting to see Nissan change now that we officially know that it is happening.
One thing I'm definitely also looking forward to, and I'm sure it's soon to come, and something we should all watch out for, is that Infiniti, Nissan's luxury branch, will also hopefully follow soon with a similar style update. Because, of course, they do use a lot of similar platforms and chassis and engines. It will be really good to see if Nissan not only updates their consumer cars, but also their luxury end. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too. So our next little bit of news here, Hertz, one of the largest car rental companies and car sales companies, well, they filed for bankruptcy.
This has kind of woken up the car world in a lot of ways. We know that coronavirus or COVID 19 has caused a lot of issues with car sales, but a lot of times we forget that car rentals were actually affected even more because, unlike car sales, they weren't able to offer those incentives like 0% down or 72-month financing with no interest and those kind of really lucrative deals that the car dealerships have been putting out to their consumers. Hertz has been hurting a lot because of a basically complete shutdown in terms of rentals since no one is traveling. And so it's unfortunate to see such an iconic company that's definitely been a leader in the rental industry and even in the car sales industry really sinking.
Well, truth be told, these car rental companies were suffering even before COVID 19. And I think COVID 19 just kind of pushed them over the edge. But because of things like Uber and Lyft and how easily available those are to tourists, and also to things like Turo, which are like the Airbnb of car rentals, if you guys have ever heard of Turo, they just make car rentals so much easier and more convenient that people don't need to look to these traditional companies that much anymore because the whole tourism industry, as far as transportation goes, has been changing.
Right. I will say one kind of silver lining to Hertz sinking is that they will definitely try to put out very lucrative deals for their car sales.
Yeah, so there's definitely going to be a lot more car sales for, because as you guys may know, Hertz sells their used fleet cars, and there's definitely now going to be a ton of deals on those used fleet cars. So if anyone is looking to buy a used consumer car, I'm sure that Hertz will probably have a good deal coming up soon.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is that since Hertz typically is selling these cars after running them briefly as rental cars, they're typically base models and not typically fully loaded, top of the line trim versions of these cars. The good thing is, though, if you're a high school or a college student looking for a cheap car with really low miles, this could actually be a really good move.
So yeah, even though Hertz is having some tough times, people may be able to benefit from it.
Yeah.
So moving on with the consumer car theme, the Hyundai Santa Fe. It's one of the best-selling SUVs out there, and it's a really good SUV. Lots of good premium quality features for a not so premium price.
Yeah, this was honestly, I would like to say, a Hyundai renaissance. When this car came out, they started adopting that very popular industry norm these days of splitting the LED accent lights at the top with the main headlights actually being provided where fog lights would typically be placed. And they did it right, they didn't mess up like the Jeep. And it actually looks good. And the car was a popular seller. It came with adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, all of those really great safety features that you like to see. It was roomy and definitely an industry leader.
So, adding on to the Hyundai Santa Fe, it was actually one of the first cars that they made heavily with Kia's partnership, because they do have quite a big partnership there, and they own stake of the Kia company.
Right.
So, naturally, this car was also a good sign of that collaboration. And now they're going to be expanding on that in their new 2021 Hyundai Santa Fe. Now, it's not directly it's not styled like the Kia Sorento, but there are a lot of interior parts that are going to match the Kia Sorento. But as you can see, they kept that whole splitting the headlight part, but it looks a lot more aggressive and a lot more, I'd say, almost sleeker, right?
Yeah, the car actually looks like it's really fast. And when a car typically looks like it's fast, that's a good sign. It takes a lot for these designers to make sure the proportions of cars are right. And a lot of laymen like you and I don't really realize the amount of design and number of iterations that these guys go through to make sure that a car doesn't look awkward, but still looks new, different, and futuristic. And I think Hyundai has really hit the bullseye with this one. They've done a great job of designing an SUV that looks sporty, but hopefully still has the wonderful features that we know and love. And you can actually see they've done a great job of maintaining their new grille philosophy with a much larger, wider grille and keeping that diamond like shape in the front.
I think that Hyundai and Kia, with their partnership, they're definitely. I think currently they are almost leading the consumer car segment, and I think they'll be dominating it soon. I mean, we did just discuss Nissan reinventing themselves, but for the time being, it seems like Hyundai and Kia are going to have a dominant stake in that consumer car industry because they've just been killing it recently.
Yeah, it seems like they're finally coming together as a prime consumer vehicle candidate because for a long time they've had the reliability and the wonderful long term 100,000 mile 5 year warranties. They've been really buyer friendly. They're good at negotiating and you're good at finding really reasonable prices. But the one thing that was always lacking with Hyundai's and Kia's was the design. And now for them to have these really cool, futuristic looking, almost luxury car segment rivaling designs, but still matching that wonderful reliability and that wonderful warranty and customer service that these companies have always brought, these cars could be real competitors in the consumer field.
I think really as we go into the next decade, after seeing Nissan what they're doing, after seeing what Hyundai and Kia are doing, we're really going to have a great renaissance of the consumer car industry, and we're finally going to have consumer cars that really, really compete with those high-end luxury cars for a really good price and for the average person. Now let's head into car roast. So today's car roast, well, I think it's a pretty common enemy. We're going to be discussing the Toyota Prius. Now, this is the early version of the Prius, and most people may not be familiar with this exact model year. It was released quite a few years ago, and I guess this Prius almost just looks like a Corolla with slight modifications, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I agree. It's got the classic bicycle tire sized wheels. It's got a very generic look, really sad grill, those headlights that seem to fog and haze over after 2 minutes of driving, dinky little side mirrors. Honestly, it looks like garbage, and I guess that's what they were going for.
I mean, look, this was one of the first ever hybrid cars in the consumer industry. And well, I mean, it did mean a lot. So they tried to make it look different, but different hasn't always been good for the way they've been doing it. And well, a few years later, they did change the styling, and that's the styling that most of us are familiar with as seen in this picture here.
Right. They transitioned to this body shape and this chassis, which has become synonymous with garbage vehicle. If you Google garbage cars, I promise you the Toyota Prius in this design with this awkward, like rendezvous Aztec style rounded back hatchback design and a vertical end, and then this pseudo aerodynamic front with the return of the bicycle tires for wheels is ugly. It's gross, and even the colors that they offered them in were gross.
Yeah, this whole pistachio green color thing, it's really not working. And most of them did come with plastic hubcaps, which also didn't help. And might I add, those front headlights are just weird. They're just strange. I mean, we talk about headlights being one of the most prominent things that show that your car is futuristic, but if you were making a hybrid in the early era and wanted to be futuristic, that is the exact opposite of what you would want to do.
Right. And I know that some of you out there might say, well, a lot of cars back in, the early 2000s look like this. A lot of them had plastic rims and hubcaps. A lot of them had this typical hatchback design, but that's just the problem. While a lot of those car companies continue to evolve and update those designs, and so they were only temporary, maybe for a year or two, engineers at Toyota, or designers at Toyota, I should say, were so convinced that this was the vehicle in the shape they wanted that they stuck with this design through time. This design stayed with us, and honestly, as I grew, the car didn't. And it looks the same now, even when you see it on the road. I guess partly to blame is that it was reliable, and I'm not going to lie, I'm glad that they were, but of course, they're Toyota, they're known for their reliability.
And also, they had almost a 59 miles to the gallon, which was really, really good for a hybrid. And I mean, yeah, like I said earlier, it was one of the first hybrids of its time. Hybrid vehicles weren't really that common, so it was pretty revolutionary.
I can't tell you how many Ubers I've been in, regardless of the country, whether it's the States or the UK or Europe, where they have always had every taxi driver driving a Prius because of how eco-friendly it was. They weren't losing a lot of money on gas. The only problem was it looked like garbage.
Yeah, and I mean, so they tried to fix it, and moving into the newer era, the latest Prius that you can see on stores is this, and well, it's very very angled, and I guess they made the headlights better. I did complain about the headlights. There's new headlights.
So one thing that this really reminds me of is, so we know that Lexus's design philosophy, especially recently, has been super polarizing. They've done a lot of sharp angles, a lot of really rigid designs. And it feels like they were like, okay, we've got to make the Prius cool. They got together in a meeting. They all sat down. They were like, hey, can someone invite the Lexus engineers? Because they seem to know what they're doing with those fisheye hook LED accents on their IS. And the Lexus engineers showed up. They said, hey, could you just help our Prius boys a little bit, help them design a cool looking Prius since you guys are pros at it? And they did. They just erased a couple lines on the old Prius and used a ruler instead of a rounded edge. And out came this weird looking thing. Honestly, I don't know why it looks like a squirrel. It looks like if a car could be a squirrel, this is the most squirrel like a car could get. It's got really weird accented lights. The entire front light assembly is a slingshot. It's an upside down Y. It looks really weird. Y is the theme for this car, right? Why did they design it? Why did they keep making the Prius? Why are they still making a hybrid in the era of electric cars? Why did they think anyone's going to buy this? And that's what I see in this car. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I guess they didn't get it right the third time around when they were designing this car. And I mean, Prius sales definitely tanked when this car was released. The Prius sales have been down for a while actually, and a lot of people have been wondering where is it going to go from here? Because electric cars are a thing now, and hybrids they're not as much needed. And the hybrids that do exist, they're differently styled. They're more normally styled. But earlier this year, in about January, Toyota did release what a Prius concept might look like in the future. So here's the front end of that.
Why? And honestly, that's the first thing you think. Think about it. What's the base price of a Prius?
Around $30,000.
Right. A Prius starts at around $30,000. This is a four-door hatchback, seats 4, 5 a little uncomfortably, right? And it's starting at $30,000. Once you add blind spot and all of those typical convenience features that you see in a car, cruise control, navigation, and all of that, this car is pushing $40,000.
Yeah, it's quite expensive, especially for a consumer car that's meant for the general public. And when you compare it to like electric cars and other hybrids, it's almost overpriced.
That's the problem. Now you're seeing entry-level electric cars getting very close, if not matching, some of the upper-level Priuses. And so a lot of people are thinking, why not stretch my dollar, get something that looks much nicer, is futuristic, and is completely electric, so the environmental lovers are saying, let's completely switch over. Why are we doing this 50-50 thing? And the car lovers are saying, yeah, that's a lot more fun. Why would I even drive this basically mom minivan car that's smushed into a
I don't know,
hatchback?
yeah. It kind of seems like they took like 7 different types of cars and smushed it into one, and they didn't try to make it look good. They just tried to make it look. And like this concept, I mean, they fixed the headlights and it looks a little better from the front, but the back end is so strange.
The back end is a train wreck. That vertical fin stabilizer, for one, is doing nothing. And for two, it looks like some, those weird deep sea animals you find like at the very, very low depths of the ocean where it's like got like one glowing like ding dong on the front of it and like big ass teeth. That's the problem with it is it looks like something from the deep sea. One of those creatures that you never wanted to see in your life and could have gone your whole life without seeing. And the engineers at Toyota pulled it out and said, hey, let's model this into a car. Let's not. Let's just leave it alone. Let's let the Prius die. Much better cars have died out. This should have been one of the first to go. And I think it's about time we don't see a Prius anymore. Toyota, if you're out there and you're listening, make an electric car. Completely scrap this design. Start with a blank piece of paper. Do what Nissan did.
Yeah.
Change your lineup.
For sure. And I think that they're already somewhat moving into that direction. If anyone has seen the old Toyota Mirai, a hydrogen fuel cell car, it was basically a Prius. Looked a little bit different, but it was a Prius. And the new one that they're pushing is completely different. It's a traditional sedan, and it looks nothing like the original Mirai. So if we do think about Toyota making a Prius in the future, hopefully this is not the direction that they choose to go in, and hopefully they choose to change it completely, or they discontinue the car as a whole, because it doesn't deserve to be a car that drives on the road, and frankly, it's not needed in this economy anymore.
I completely agree. The way I see it, Toyota had two options here, right? They could either keep making a traditional looking consumer car like every other car company, or if they wanted to go outside the box, try something really cool and different, but interesting. Instead, they tried something ugly and different and not interesting. And that's really where they fell out. So I hope that if they're going to keep it going, just make it look normal and that's fine. If you
Hmm.
can't make it look cool, I understand. Not everyone's a great designer. Or, like you're saying, let's just stop it altogether.
Now let's move on to our next segment, the debate straight. So, a big discussion in the car world is what type of car should the average person buy? A crossover or a sedan that fits as many people as a crossover? And, well, I say we have some pretty interesting opinions on that and quite different opinions.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, crossovers are really, really nice for the average family. I think they're nice and large, there's a lot of big storage space, and a lot of them have really, really good features, and almost every company offers some type of crossover, and they're somewhat unique in a way.
Right. Well, before I start arguing with that, the reason that I think sedans are wonderful is because they offer a fun daily driver, better fuel economy. They're still fairly family friendly, especially if you have a growing family with little kids. They're fun for road trips. They give you that sporty feel when you want it, and they offer wonderful convenience features. They're just easier to drive, easier to handle, easier to park.
Well, the thing is about crossovers, the whole easier to park thing, half of them have park assist now. Park assist is almost everywhere, and most cars have really, really good cameras. But sitting high up in like a captain's chair position is so comfortable. And every time I've gotten into a sedan, no matter how high it may be, it's not as comfortable as getting up into a crossover.
So, in my opinion, the problem with hatchbacks, and that's what I'm going to call them, honestly, crossovers are really just lifted hatchbacks, okay? All they did was design the hatchback that they used to design and added a couple more inches in the suspension and then slapped a crossover badge on top. That's my issue with them. They are SUV wannabes, but they can't really do the SUV part very well, and they also then end up sucking at the sedan part because the whole point of sedans is to give you that sporty feel, like you're in sync with your vehicle. You can drive it, you feel the road, you're in a much more comfortable driving position. You feel like you're a race car when you want to be a race car, especially depending on the sedan you choose. Whereas crossovers feel like minivans that have been redone, and that's what who you see driving them mostly: soccer moms, people that are driving these for grocery shopping, for like trips to pick up kids from school. And don't get me wrong, they're convenient, but why are we calling them crossovers when they're just lifted hatchbacks?
Well, I think some of them, I think they used to be lifted hatchbacks. And I would completely agree with you there. But I think the new crossover generation is different. They are larger than traditional hatchbacks. And if you lowered one, it would be larger than a Toyota Corolla hatchback. But in my opinion, sedans have another big issue, and that's the interior space. Now, some of them have interior space, but when they have more interior space, they lack a trunk. And when they have a big trunk, they lack interior space. You're losing the ability to do things like road trips and stuff like that. And on top of that, you did mention parking earlier, and all sedans have larger hoods, and they're harder to see in front. Whereas with a crossover, you're high, you have less hoods, and you can just get a way better judgment on the car. And I really just think that like they're more practical as a whole than these sedans are.
So a lot of people make that style of argument, and I totally get it, right? People like to sit higher up. Here's the thing. It's like being king of the jungle. There's always going to be a bigger animal in the jungle, or there's always going to be a bigger fish in the sea. You know what I mean? You feel like you're sitting higher up in a crossover, then a real SUV pulls up next to you, and now you're suddenly small. Or a semi pulls up next to you, and you're suddenly small. Sedans never make you feel like you're going to be sitting high up. You know what you're going to get the minute you buy a sedan. One of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, is a significant reduction in body roll. I can take a turn in a sedan significantly faster without having a fear of like tipping over the car or losing traction compared to in a crossover where every little turn feels like I'm on a boat and I'm really rocking left and right.
Well, here's the thing. If it was a consumer car, I don't think I would care too much. I'm taking standard left turns and standard right turns. And I drive a crossover daily. I drive a 2016 Nissan Rogue. And personally, you only experience body roll if you're trying to gun it on a cul-de-sac. And you're never trying to do that in a consumer car. And my main issue, you said that these sedans are usually sportier. But the thing is, most sedans are not. The sedans in this image, like the Toyota Corolla, the Nissan Altima, the Volkswagen Passat, they're barely sporty. And should you want to get a sporty sedan, it's much more expensive and then immediately less practical.
One thing that a lot of people forget though is the benefit of sedans is that they're already going to start at a cheaper price. So it's actually easier to get the sportiest trim for these sedans. A lot of these sedans like you're talking about, for example, the Nissan has a midnight package, has a sportier package with paddle shifters and a leather interior and a moonroof. And because of that, you get a lot more for the bang of your buck. You know what I mean? Like you get a lot more and it's still cheaper than a crossover.
Well, the thing about the crossovers is that the prices end up equaling out because you don't have to pay for extra sporty packages or anything. You get a lot for the car itself. And you did mention the midnight package on the Nissan Altima, but most packages for these sedans that are entry level, they're aesthetic. You don't get more power half of the time, and if you are getting more power, then you're paying more for the crossover. Than more than the crossover.
While that's completely fair, another thing you have to remember is that, in my opinion, I think sedans are easier to control. When I first learned to drive, I drove a hatchback, a regular hatchback, and it was basically like a sedan, low to the ground, very easy to drive, really easy to handle, super maneuverable, quick pickup, quick brakes, and that was really valuable when you're learning to drive and you make mistakes often. Whereas with a crossover, big mistakes happen a lot more easily, in my opinion.
Well, here's the thing. My first car that I ever drove on was a crossover. And let me just say this. I never felt like I was losing out and I wanted a sedan because crossovers do give you better judgment because when you're higher up, you can see more of your hood. And the features that these crossovers usually have that I guess some sedans have now, the crossovers had them earlier. And those features really help you with everything. And there's so much nicer vehicles. And honestly, sometimes when you want to drive, you want a car that can just adapt to anything. And a lot of crossovers can adapt to almost all circumstances. You're usually going to get all-wheel drive. You're usually going to get really nice space on the inside. And it's just a really comfortable car for you and if you wanted to take other people.
Look, you're in the majority here, right? Crossovers have become the number one most selling segment right behind trucks in the United States. And globally, they are the number one most selling vehicle. That's why we're seeing a lot of companies putting out crossovers that would have never put out crossovers. For example, Lamborghini put out an SUV, and they never would have done that. That SUV is basically a crossover. And so I get it. Crossovers are taking over. But as a car lover and a car person, my priority has honestly always been in the minority. As a car person and a car enthusiast, sedans are where it's at. Sedans are what I would take to my racetrack. Even if it was an Altima, it would be fun. I would modify it. I'd take it to my racetrack. And for that reason, I'm seeing them start to die because crossovers are kind of like a plague taking over and everyone wants to buy a crossover. No one's buying a sedan anymore. As a car person, I want to see sedans live on. I want to see them being driven more. I think there's definitely a huge place for them. I just wish that people would look past just sitting higher up and think about what it feels like to drive and enjoy driving for what it gives you and that's just pure fun.
Well, look, like you said, the general population is shifting to a crossover, and I think that's where most people are going to think when they're buying a car, and based on the price difference, because they're really dwindling on that price difference, they're probably going to pick a crossover and not a sedan, especially in areas with heavy rain and snow where they want all-wheel drive and they want better things for that type of weather. But yeah, I think that family sedans are a dying breed. I completely agree. But I think that with them being a dying breed, I think sportier cars will eventually take over their place and crossovers will become the new family car.
Yeah, that's all I can hope. Honestly, if it means the end of minivans, that's completely fine. Minivans had their place when they were there, and I think crossovers have kind of taken over and started to dominate that space. A lot of people that would have bought minivans are buying crossovers now. And so for that purpose, I totally see why they're around. But if it were me, I would have at least one sedan in my garage.
So I guess we could conclude this debate with the final consensus that crossovers are great for the general population. Sedans are fine if you're really looking for something sporty, but most people are probably going to get a crossover. But whatever you do, don't buy a minivan.
Don't buy a minivan.
Well, guys, that's all we have for today's video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and watch our previous video for more car culture. Also, the audio version of our podcast is now on Anchor.fm and Spotify. The link for that will be in the description. Also, you can follow us on Instagram at carculture_TV, and stay tuned for next week's episode.
Thank you.
I do you do 'cause I'm feeling so good.